Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed his busy restaurant, Golden Pearl, on a crisp Seattle evening. The chandelier lights sparkled off the carefully arranged wine glasses, and the gentle music barely masked the cheerful chatter of satisfied customers. As one of the city's up-and-coming fine dining establishments, every detail needed to be perfect. Tonight had already tested his patience. First, his head chef called in sick at the last minute, forcing Marcus to step into the kitchen himself. Then, a prestigious food critic's reservation got mixed up, leading to an awkward 15-minute wait. Now, as he finally caught his breath, his hostess Jessica approached with a concerned look on her face. "Mr. Chen," she whispered, gesturing discreetly toward the entrance. "I'm not sure what to do about this situation." Marcus looked up to see an elderly couple standing just inside the door. The man wore a worn plaid shirt tucked into faded khaki pants that had clearly seen better days. His wife, a petite woman with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, wore a dated floral dress and scuffed shoes. They looked completely out of place among the designer suits and evening dresses that filled the dining room. As Marcus watched, the couple hesitated, their eyes wide as they took in the crystal stemware and silk tablecloths. Other diners had begun to notice them too. A woman in a black cocktail dress wrinkled her nose and whispered something to her companion. The businessman quickly averted his eyes and became very interested in his menu. Marcus felt his anxiety rising. He'd worked too hard building Golden Pearl's reputation to risk making his regular customers uncomfortable. This was meant to be an exclusive dining experience, and their presence was already disrupting the carefully cultivated atmosphere. Jessica led the couple to a table in the corner, where they sat studying the menus with intense concentration. Marcus noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly as she pointed to different items, whispering calculations to her husband. The man kept adjusting his collar, as if feeling the weight of the other diners' stares. From his years of experience, Marcus could tell they were probably adding up prices, trying to figure out what they could afford. His stomach tightened as he remembered his own parents doing the same thing when he was young, those rare times they saved up for a special meal out. But business was business. Golden Pearl's prices reflected its quality and exclusivity. He couldn't risk his reputation or make his regular customers uncomfortable. With a deep breath, Marcus straightened his tie and walked toward their table, rehearsing the speech he'd give about being fully booked, even though several tables stood empty. As he approached, he caught fragments of their conversation. The woman was saying something about their anniversary, 50 years of marriage. The man reached across the table to pat her hand gently, promising to make it special somehow. Marcus hesitated for just a moment, then continued forward. He had a business to run, after all. He couldn't let sentiment cloud his judgment, not when he'd worked so hard to make Golden Pearl one of Seattle's most prestigious restaurants. As he reached their table, both looked up at him with hopeful smiles that made his practiced words stick in his throat. But he had made his decision. "I'm sorry," he began, forcing himself to maintain eye contact, "but I think there might be a misunderstanding. Perhaps I can suggest a lovely diner just down the street that might be more." He paused, searching for the right word. "Suitable for your evening." Little did Marcus know, this simple decision would set in motion events that would completely transform his life and his understanding of what truly makes a restaurant great. The elderly woman's smile faded slowly, like sunshine disappearing behind clouds. Her husband placed a gentle hand on her arm, but Marcus could see the slight tremor in the man's fingers. The restaurant's usual buzz of conversation had dimmed, and Marcus felt uncomfortably aware of several pairs of eyes watching the scene unfold. "But sir," the woman spoke softly, her voice carrying a hint of dignity despite her obvious embarrassment. "Today is our golden anniversary. We've been saving for months to celebrate somewhere special." She reached into her worn purse and pulled out a small envelope, likely containing carefully counted savings. Marcus shifted his weight, fighting the growing discomfort in his chest. The woman reminded him of his own grandmother, who used to save coins in a jar for special occasions. But he had made his decision, and backing down now would only create more awkward moments for everyone involved. "I understand," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low and professional. "But Golden Pearl has certain standards we must maintain. I'm sure you understand." He gestured toward the door with what he hoped was a polite but firm manner. The elderly man stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He was shorter than Marcus had initially realized, but there was something in his bearing that made Marcus want to step back. Not anger or aggression, but a quiet sort of strength that comes from years of facing life's challenges with grace. "Come on, Marie," he said to his wife, helping her up with careful tenderness. "We don't want to cause any trouble." His voice was steady, but Marcus noticed how he carefully folded the menu and placed it exactly in the center of the table, as if he'd had experience in the restaurant business himself. As they walked toward the exit, Marie paused and turned back to Marcus. "Young man," she said, her voice gentle but clear, "I hope someday you learn that the true measure of a fine restaurant isn't just in its fancy plates or expensive wines. It's in how it makes people feel welcome, regardless of their appearance." The couple stepped out into the cool evening air, holding hands just as they had when they entered. Through the window, Marcus watched them pause under the streetlight, the elderly man wrapping his jacket around his wife's shoulders before they slowly walked away. Jessica, the hostess, appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Sir, should I mark their table as available?" Her voice carried a note of uncertainty that Marcus hadn't heard from her before. "Yes," he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "And bring fresh water glasses, please." He turned away, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort of the encounter. The regular rhythm of the restaurant gradually resumed. The clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft footsteps of servers moving between tables. But something felt different. Marcus found himself glancing at the empty table in the corner, where the carefully folded menus still sat perfectly centered. A young couple in expensive clothes now requested to be seated elsewhere, saying they preferred a table with a better view. Marcus noticed they weren't looking at the windows, but at the corner table, as if it had been marked somehow by what had just happened. As the evening continued, Marcus threw himself into his usual routine, checking plates before they left the kitchen, ensuring wine was served at the perfect temperature, maintaining the precise standards that had made Golden Pearl successful. Yet every time he passed that corner table, now occupied by a group of young professionals laughing over their appetizers, he felt a nagging sensation that he couldn't quite identify. He had maintained his standards, protected his restaurant's image, made a business decision. So why did it feel like he had failed some sort of test he hadn't known he was taking? The next morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows of Golden Pearl as Marcus reviewed the previous night's receipts. The phone rang, breaking his concentration. He reached for it automatically, expecting another supplier call or reservation request. "Golden Pearl Restaurant," Marcus Chen speaking. He answered with his usual professional tone. "Mr. Chen," a crisp voice responded. "This is Robert Thompson from the Seattle Culinary Review." Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. The Seattle Culinary Review was the most influential food publication in the Pacific Northwest. Their reviews could make or break a restaurant. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. How can I help you?" Marcus tried to keep his voice steady, though his heart had begun racing. They weren't due for a review for at least another 6 months. "I wanted to discuss an interesting experience my parents had at your establishment last night," Thompson continued, his tone carefully neutral. "They were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to tilt slightly as realization crashed over him. The elderly couple he had dismissed, the ones in the worn clothes, who he had suggested should try the diner down the street, were James and Marie Thompson. His mind raced through everything he knew about them. James Thompson had started as a dishwasher in the 1960s, working his way up through every position in the restaurant industry. Marie had been a line cook when they met. Together, they had built one of the most successful restaurant groups in the country. mentoring countless chefs and restaurateurs along the way. Mr. Chen, are you still there? Robert Thompson's voice cut through his spiral of panic. Yes, I'm here, Marcus managed to respond. Mr. Thompson, I had no idea. Please, let me explain. Actually, Thompson interrupted. I think you explained yourself quite clearly last night. My parents were particularly impressed by how you suggested the diner down the street might be more suitable for their anniversary celebration. Marcus sank into his chair, remembering his exact words with painful clarity. The couple who had built an empire from nothing, who had revolutionized the industry with their belief that fine dining should be accessible to everyone, had come to his restaurant to celebrate their anniversary, and he had shown them the door. They were planning to discuss possibly investing in promising new restaurants in the area, Thompson continued. They've always believed in supporting passionate restaurateurs who share their values about hospitality and dignity. Each word felt like a physical blow. Marcus thought about the expansion plans sitting in his desk drawer, the second location he'd been dreaming about, the cooking school he'd hoped to open someday. Mr. Thompson, Marcus began, but found he had no words to follow. What could he possibly say to justify his actions? Here's the interesting part, Mr. Chen, Thompson continued, his voice taking on an unexpected note of thoughtfulness. My parents didn't want me to make this call. They believe everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, but I thought you should know who they are and what you lost last night. The silence that followed felt endless. Marcus stared at the elegant dining room around him. The carefully chosen artwork, the expensive tablecloths, all the trappings of fine dining he had thought so important. For the first time, he wondered if in pursuing the appearance of excellence, he had forgotten what truly made a restaurant great. One more thing, Thompson added, just as Marcus thought the conversation was over. They're working on a documentary about discrimination in the restaurant industry. Last night would make quite a compelling segment, don't you think? The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of his actions and the realization that sometimes the most expensive lessons come without a price tag. Marcus spent the next 3 days barely sleeping, his mind replaying that fateful evening over and over. The usual pride he felt walking through Golden Pearl's elegant dining room had been replaced by a gnawing sense of shame. Every corner table reminded him of Marie Thompson's gentle words about true hospitality. After countless attempts at drafting apology emails that felt hollow and inadequate, Marcus finally gathered his courage. Through some careful networking and several phone calls, he managed to obtain the Thompsons' business office contact information. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number. Thompson Restaurant Group, how may I direct your call? A friendly voice answered. Hello, this is Marcus Chen from Golden Pearl Restaurant in Seattle. I'm hoping to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. He held his breath, half expecting to be dismissed just as he had dismissed them. To his surprise, after a brief hold, James Thompson's warm voice came through the line. Mr. Chen, we've been wondering if we might hear from you. Mr. Thompson, I can't begin to express how sorry I am, Marcus began, the words tumbling out. What I did was inexcusable. I lost sight of what hospitality truly means. Tell me, young man, James responded thoughtfully, why did you open a restaurant in the first place? The question caught Marcus off guard. He thought back to his childhood, watching his immigrant parents cook traditional recipes in their tiny kitchen, saving every penny to occasionally treat the family to a nice restaurant. How those rare dining experiences had made them feel special, respected, part of something elegant and beautiful. I wanted to create something special, Marcus admitted, his voice growing thick with emotion. Somewhere people could celebrate their important moments and feel valued. But somewhere along the way, I started focusing on the wrong things. There was a pause. Then James spoke again. Mary and I are conducting interviews for our documentary next week. Would you be willing to share your story? Not as a villain, but as someone who learned an important lesson about prejudice in hospitality. Marcus blinked in surprise. You'd want to include me, after what I did? Sometimes, Marie's voice joined the conversation. The most powerful stories are about people who recognize their mistakes and choose to do better. We've all had moments we're not proud of, Mr. Chen. It's what we do afterward that defines us. They arranged to meet the following week at Golden Pearl, during the quiet hours between lunch and dinner service. As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not just relief at being forgiven, but a surge of determination to prove worthy of their grace. That evening, as he watched his staff preparing for dinner service, Marcus called them all together. He shared the story of what had happened, not sparing himself any embarrassment. Then he announced changes, new training programs about unconscious bias, a revised dress code that focused on cleanliness rather than designer labels, and most importantly, a shift in how they defined their standards of excellence. From now on, he told his team, our highest standard will be how we make people feel when they walk through those doors. Every single person who comes here deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Looking at his staff's faces, some surprise, others thoughtful, a few nodding in agreement, Marcus realized that this humbling experience might become the most important moment in his restaurant's history, not because of who the Thompsons were, but because of who he now had the chance to become. As he adjusted the corner table's centerpiece that evening, making sure it was perfectly aligned, Marcus smiled slightly. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come served with a generous side of humility. The following week, James and Marie Thompson walked into Golden Pearl again, this time greeted by Marcus himself with genuine warmth. They chose the same corner table where their previous visit had ended so abruptly. The restaurant was quiet in the afternoon lull, sunlight streaming through the windows and catching the dust motes in golden beams. Before we start filming, James said, settling into his chair, tell us about your journey in the restaurant business. His eyes were kind but keen, missing nothing as he studied Marcus's face. Mary pulled out a small notebook, the same one she'd carried that night. We've read about Golden Pearl's success, but we'd like to hear your story firsthand. Marcus poured them water, noticing how Marie's hand still trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. The sight made his chest tighten with renewed regret. He sat down, taking a deep breath before beginning his tale. My parents ran a small noodle shop, he shared, his voice soft with memory. They worked 14-hour days, but always smiled at every customer. I used to watch them treat each person like family, whether they ordered the most expensive dish or just a simple bowl of soup. James nodded encouragingly, and Marcus continued, describing his culinary school years, the odd jobs, the late nights planning his own restaurant. As he spoke, Marie jotted notes, occasionally exchanging knowing looks with her husband. But somewhere along the way, Marcus admitted, I started focusing on the wrong things. The prestigious reviews, the expensive wines, the exclusive image. I forgot what made my parents' little shop so special. They made everyone feel like they belonged. James leaned forward, sharing his own story. Our first restaurant was a tiny diner with mismatched plates, he recalled, chuckling. We could barely afford proper uniforms, but we had a rule. Treat every customer like they're the most important person in the room. Mary reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph, sliding it across the table. It showed a young couple standing proudly in front of a modest storefront. Their clothes were simple, but their smiles radiated joy and determination. That was us 45 years ago, she explained. We still dress simply when we visit restaurants. It tells us everything we need to know about how they treat people who don't look wealthy. Marcus studied the photograph, seeing in their younger faces the same quiet dignity they carried now. How did you stay grounded? He asked. As you became successful? James smiled, reaching for his wife's hand. We never forgot what it felt like to be judged by our appearance. Every time someone dismissed us, it strengthened our resolve to create restaurants where everyone would feel welcome. That's why we're making this documentary, Marie added. Not to shame anyone, but to show that true hospitality sees the person, not the packaging. As they talked, the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the restaurant floor. Marcus found himself sharing his new plans for Golden Pearl. The training programs, the community initiatives, the shift in culture he wanted to create. The Thompsons listened intently, occasionally offering gentle suggestions drawn from their decades of experience. They spoke about difficult moments in their own journey, times they'd faced discrimination, and how they'd turned those experiences into opportunities for growth. "You know," James said thoughtfully as their conversation drew to a close, "sometimes the most beautiful things grow from moments of discomfort. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about what you learn from them." Mary touched Marcus's arm gently. "We see something special in you, Mr. Chen. The same passion for hospitality we had at your age. Sometimes we need a reminder of what truly matters." As they prepared for the documentary interview, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had expected judgment but found mentorship instead. The Thompsons weren't just sharing their story. They were helping him write a new chapter in his own. Over the next few months, Golden Pearl underwent a remarkable transformation. Marcus started by introducing community Sunday dinners, where once a month, the restaurant opened its doors to homeless individuals, serving them with the same elegance and respect accorded to any guest. The regular customers who witnessed these evenings often found themselves deeply moved, with many offering to sponsor future dinners. The first Sunday dinner was particularly memorable. Marcus stood nervously at the door, watching as Jessica, his hostess, welcomed each guest with genuine warmth. A man in a weathered jacket paused at the entrance, his eyes wide at the sight of the crystal glasses and fine china. "Are you sure this is right?" he asked hesitantly. "I don't want to cause any trouble." Marcus stepped forward, remembering Mary Thompson's words about dignity. "You're our honored guest tonight, sir. Please, let me show you to your table." The man's face lit up with a smile that made all the preparation worthwhile. Word spread quickly about Golden Pearl's new initiative. Local business leaders began reaching out, wanting to support the program. But Marcus didn't stop there. He established a mentorship program, offering kitchen apprenticeships to young people from underprivileged backgrounds who dreamed of careers in the culinary world. One of his first apprentices was Sarah, a bright-eyed teenager who reminded him of himself at that age. She had been living in a shelter when she heard about the program. Despite never having formal training, her natural talent with flavors and dedication to learning impressed everyone in the kitchen. "You know," she told Marcus one day while carefully plating a dessert, "before this, I never thought fine dining could be part of my world. Now I see it differently." The restaurant's regular customers noticed the changes too. The atmosphere had shifted subtly but significantly. While the food and service remained impeccable, there was a new warmth in the air, a sense of genuine welcome that went beyond mere politeness. Even the staff seemed different. Gone was the subtle snobbery that sometimes crept into high-end establishments. Instead, there was pride in making every guest feel special, regardless of their appearance or background. The corner table, once a symbol of Marcus's biggest mistake, became known as the welcome table, often reserved for first-time guests who seemed uncertain about fine dining. Marcus started offering cooking classes on weekend mornings, teaching basic culinary skills to anyone interested in learning. The classes quickly became popular, mixing experienced home cooks with complete beginners, creating an unexpected community of food lovers from all walks of life. One Saturday morning, as he watched a corporate executive and a retired janitor work together to perfect their sauce technique, Marcus realized something profound. Golden Pearl had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a place where barriers dissolved over shared meals and common interests. The local press took notice. Reviews began mentioning not just the excellent food and service, but the restaurant's unique approach to community engagement. Business actually improved, with many guests saying they chose Golden Pearl specifically because of its inclusive atmosphere. During a quiet moment one evening, Marcus found himself standing in the same spot where he had once watched the Thompsons leave. The memory no longer filled him with shame, but with gratitude for the lesson learned. The elegant dining room around him was still beautiful, but now it felt truly welcoming. Jessica approached with a gentle smile. "There's a family at the door," she said. "They're a bit unsure about coming in. The children are worried they're not dressed nicely enough." Marcus straightened his tie and headed toward the entrance, remembering his own childhood experiences. "Let's make sure they know they're exactly where they belong," he said, feeling a warmth in his heart that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. 1 year after that fateful evening, Golden Pearl buzzed with excitement. James and Marie Thompson had returned, this time as special guests for a celebration that would mark a new chapter in the restaurant's history. The documentary they had created about discrimination in the restaurant industry had premiered to widespread acclaim, with Marcus's story of transformation touching hearts across the country. The Thompsons sat at their usual corner table, now marked with a small golden plaque reading, "Where Change Begins." Around them, the dining room was filled with a diverse mix of guests, regular customers in business suits, families celebrating special occasions, and participants from the mentorship program, proudly serving dishes they had learned to prepare. Sarah, now a full-time line cook, expertly plated her signature dessert, a fusion of her grandmother's recipe and classical French techniques. The dish had become so popular that food critics often mentioned it in their reviews. She caught Marcus's eye and smiled, remembering how far they had both come. James Thompson stood up, gently tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "A year ago, something happened at this very table that could have been just another sad story about prejudice. Instead, it became a story of growth, learning, and the true meaning of hospitality." Marie joined her husband, her eyes twinkling. "Which is why we're here tonight to announce that Thompson Restaurant Group will be partnering with Golden Pearl to expand this vision of inclusive fine dining across the city." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. They had been discussing this possibility for months, but hearing it announced made it real. The investment would allow him to open 2 new locations, each committed to the same principles of excellence and accessibility that Golden Pearl now embodied. Looking around the room, Marcus saw Jessica wiping away happy tears. Near the kitchen, his staff stood proudly, many of them graduates of the mentorship program. At a nearby table, a group from the monthly community dinner program chatted comfortably with some of the restaurant's longtime regular customers. "But more than just expansion," James continued, "we're establishing the Golden Pearl Hospitality Foundation. This organization will provide scholarships and training for aspiring restaurateurs from underserved communities, ensuring that the future of fine dining reflects the diversity of our city." The room erupted in applause. Marcus stepped forward, feeling both humbled and inspired. "A year ago, I thought I knew what made a restaurant great," he began. "I focused on the surface, the fancy plates, the expensive wines, the exclusive atmosphere. But thanks to 2 very patient teachers, I learned that true excellence isn't about keeping people out. It's about welcoming them in." As if to emphasize his words, the front door opened, and an elderly couple in simple clothes hesitantly peered in. Without missing a beat, Marcus walked over to greet them himself, just as he now did with every new guest who seemed uncertain about entering. "Welcome to Golden Pearl," he said warmly, leading them to a table. "We've been waiting for you." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Marie Thompson pulled Marcus aside. "You know," she said softly, "success isn't just measured in stars or reviews. It's measured in the lives you touch, the barriers you break down, the moments of joy you create." Marcus nodded, watching as Sarah taught a young guest how to properly hold a fancy fork, both of them laughing at the awkwardness. Through the windows, the Seattle skyline sparkled, and he could see his restaurant's warm light reflected in the glass, a beacon of welcome in the night. Golden Pearl had become more than he had ever dreamed possible. Not just a successful restaurant, but a place where dignity was served alongside every meal, where excellence meant making everyone feel special, and where the corner table would always remind them that sometimes the greatest lessons come from our biggest mistakes.